Morning, I'm David Littlewood, and basically I'm from Queen's University Belfast. I work with Diane Holt on a project that's looking at social and environmental enterprises in Eastern and Southern Africa. As you can see, the title of our presentation is Mapping the Trickle-Out Benefits of Social and Environmental Enterprises, a pilot study of an East African eco-business. So really just to run through in terms of the structure of the presentation. So first of all, just going to be introducing our research a little bit and where it sits in terms of current debates about the potential and sort of role of social and environmental enterprise in international development. Then going to provide a bit more information about the Trickle-Out Africa project, briefly run through some social and environmental enterprise definitions and what we understand them to be. The Trickle-Out project is very much focused on impact and measuring impact, so I'm going to briefly sort of discuss some current frameworks that we're drawing upon as we sort of develop our own impact framework. Briefly run through the methods that we employed, both in terms of the particular case study that I'm going to discuss here, but also sort of the wider Trickle-Out project. Briefly run through our developing sort of formative trickle-out impact framework before going into more detail and applying that framework to our case study, which is Cookswell Enterprises, which is a environmental enterprise based in Kenya. Yeah, so really this first slide is just to get an understanding of where the Trickle-Out project sort of comes from. So I think certainly in the last couple of years there's been a real sort of upsurge in interest in terms of how social and environmental businesses can contribute to global sustainable development, how they can contribute to solving a lot of sort of long-standing complex development issues, the sort of potential of social enterprise for societal change, for kind of transformation. And I think that's reflected in things like the recent engagement with social enterprise, social entrepreneurship at the Rio +20 conference, initiatives like the United Nations Seed Initiative, which supports innovative, small-scale, locally driven social and environmental entrepreneurship. But at the same time, while there's been sort of a growth in interest in this area, I think there's still lots and lots of gaps in terms of research looking at social and environmental enterprises in Africa and in sort of wider developing world environments. So it's kind of within that context that the Trickle-Out project was initiated. So this is just a bit more background about the Trickle-Out Africa project. It's a research project funded by the Economic and Social Research Council. Essentially it's a study of social and environmental enterprises in East and Southern Africa and their role in sustainable development and poverty alleviation. There are really sort of two big parts to the project. The project as a whole covers 19 countries, which is the 19 countries which comprise the Southern African Development Community and the East African Community. As you can see on the map, that's the various countries that we're looking at. So the first part of the project involves really trying to map and to understand the social enterprise sectors across these different countries. So we had some postgraduate students who searched throughout the internet to try and find evidence of these kinds of organisations, and we then sent out a survey to as many of these businesses as possible in these different countries, and really that survey was asking things like, okay, what do you do? When did you start? When did you get the startup funding for your business? How were decisions made within your organisation? Really sort of quite a broad survey, because as I say, these are all sorts of questions that we don't really know the answer to in terms of Southern and Eastern Africa. As part of incentivising, and also as a key output from the project, incentivising sort of participation, we developed on our website a directory, a free online directory of social and environmental enterprises. And basically it's like a big business pages of alternative business covering all of those 19 countries, and it's searchable. And as I say, it was one of the ways in which we felt our research could add value and sort of give something back to the community that we were working with. So the second part of the research, which is really what I'm going to sort of concentrate on in this presentation, involves in-depth case study work. And we've done in-depth case study work in Kenya, South Africa, Zambia, and then also we were originally just focusing on those 3 countries, but then we had some interest from some social enterprises, some interesting social enterprises operating in Mozambique, and said, do you fancy coming over and working with us? So we've also extended it to them as well. So we have 20 in-depth case studies, in those sort of 4 countries. If you go on the website, there's a preliminary profile and information about all of those different case studies. But basically, for each of the case studies, what we're trying to do is to understand how they operate, and particularly to map the kinds of impacts that they have in communities, focusing on this idea that the impacts that they have diffuse out or trickle out into communities and along sort of value chains. So really just briefly run through definitions of social enterprise, what we understand social and environmental enterprise to be. Obviously there's not a great deal of consensus around these terms. We think that's particularly the case in developing world environments in Africa. Some of the key characteristics that we pick out in terms of our understanding of the social enterprise is obviously that it should be mission-centred, surpluses or profits used for social and environmental purposes, income generation through trading activity. One of the things that we're finding through our survey and also with our case studies is that it's maybe not quite as clear-cut as, say, social enterprises here in the UK or social enterprises in the US in terms of the level that they've achieved in terms of trading income. So a lot of our organisations or organisations that came and designated themselves as social enterprises will maybe be trading at really quite a low level. So we think that there are some quite important differences between how what a social enterprise is in the West, in the UK versus Africa and developing world environments. They should be addressing social and environmental problems in an innovative way and have a non-profit maximising approach. Obviously, there's some debate about whether or also to what extent you classify environmental enterprises as part of the sort of the wider social enterprise sort of group of organisations, or whether they should be considered separate. We have sort of separated out the two, but again we recognise that there's lots of crossover between them, and again particularly in an African context. I mean, we're finding, let's say, an organisation that is selling solar lights or giving solar lights for informal economy entrepreneurs to sell. They also have both a strong environmental component and a strong sort of social component. So we think that the lines between social and environmental enterprise are quite blurred in the environment that we're working in. So as I say, the Trickle Out project is focused on impact and really mapping the impacts of our different case studies. We're still developing our sort of impact framework. The case study that I'm going to sort of talk through is the first of 20 case studies that we've worked through, so there's still a lot of work to go on in terms of our framework and how we develop our framework. Some of the existing sort of impact assessment frameworks that we are starting to draw upon include London's Base of the Pyramid impact assessment framework, which is maybe more focused on specifically kind of VOD ventures, so we were not quite sure how appropriate that would be, or how applicable that would be in itself to cover a lot of our social and environmental enterprises, so we sort of draw on that a little bit. Again, with the Oxfam poverty footprint, that's maybe more focused on traditional businesses, but it has sort of insights for our social enterprises. With the Simple framework developed by Social Enterprise London, we sort of question again, or wonder, although it's useful, how readily can you transplant a framework for mapping impact from the UK to Africa. So really, it's our framework. As I say, we're still sort of building it and working our way through, but we're drawing on these some of these frameworks and various other ones. As I said, we have in total 20 in-depth case studies. For each of those case studies, what we tried to do working with the organisations was to identify key stakeholders, key informants, and then we have interviewed them. We've done focus groups, observation research questionnaires, sort of slightly mixed, slightly varied methods depending on the individual case study, so whichever method was most appropriate to different ones. In the Cookswell case study that I'm just going to outline briefly now, we had 12 in-depth interviews with the founder, with some of the production technicians, with some of the purchasers, some of the people who had established businesses selling the G-Coast, selling the cook stoves. We sent out a questionnaire of purchasers, and we've analysed various secondary materials. We really picked the Cookswell case because it was probably our smallest case study, so it was quite a manageable one to start off with. We have some other case studies that are huge, sort of involving thousands of people. This is just the preliminary sort of trickle-out impact framework. So we're focused on the sustainable development impacts and the poverty alleviation impacts. So what we've tried to do is to separate out the sustainable development impacts to social, environmental, economic, and at various spatial scales, recognising the potential for both positive and negative impacts. On the poverty alleviation front, we have very much a multidimensional understanding of poverty and a multidimensional understanding of well-being. So we tried to identify five sort of key areas where we think that our organisations might be contributing to poverty alleviation with this sort of wider understanding of what exactly it is. So again, I would say there's still plenty of scope for maybe adjusting some of these categories and what exactly we sort of include in them. And with the poverty alleviation one, again, we've identified key stakeholder groups, and we would sort of work through those and try and understand what the various impacts are. So the actual case study, it's Cookswell Enterprises, founded in 1982 with support from the World Bank and one or two local organisations. Basically, it sells energy-efficient charcoal ovens and stoves, sells them throughout Kenya, Rwanda, Tanzania, Uganda. It also has, as a sort of side operation to the business, it sells small packets of multi-use indigenous tree seeds, which is quite we thought was quite interesting sort of entrepreneurial activity that they were doing, and it was actually quite interesting to show. We ended up giving some of our tree seeds to some of our other case studies in other countries, and they were quite excited about what they were doing. So the idea with these small tree seeds is that they're suitable for base of the pyramid customers, that they're also suitable for sort of households, and that they give away these tree seeds with the purchase of every stove. So the idea is that you have your cook stove, but you also plant your tree seeds in your garden, and then eventually in the long term you have a sort of long-term sustainable energy source. Yeah, so this is really again sort of a preliminary impact map for the Cookswell case study. I think the piece of paper is actually a slightly updated version, so we are still sort of developing things. We're going to try and develop something akin to this for each of our case studies, and a sort of a table like that, and also a diagram. Obviously, one of the things that we're quite keen to think about is the trickle-out benefits. So maybe not only how our businesses have an impact on sort of say an immediate purchaser, but how that might also have an impact kind of further down the line. So things like if a social enterprise is working to help people set up businesses, how that might then help them support extended family networks who are living in rural areas, the sort of connections, the focus on the connections in our case studies. Yeah, again, a similar table based on poverty alleviation. I won't become short on time. Yeah, in terms of the conclusions, so as I say, basically the focus of the research is to develop impact maps for our various social enterprise case studies. We have a lot of diversity in terms of our case studies, so it's still very much a work in progress. Recognising the potential for positive and negative impacts of our social enterprise. I think there's maybe a tendency sometimes at the moment to focus on the positive and the very good aspects of social enterprise, whereas there has to be some sort of downsides of these kinds of things. What happens when it goes wrong? Recognising that impact is sort of temporal, and certainly things like, okay, tree planting, it will take probably 10 years before those trees you're actually able to chop down the trees and use the trees. And yeah, various different spatial scales amongst various stakeholders. So yeah, that's basically our work so far.